Okay, good afternoon. Thank you very much for attending the third of 4 workshops for Rhodes and Marshall nomination applicants. Today, we're going to be going over graduate study in the UK, and we're going to go over some fundamentals on program selection. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the requirements, like what are the Rhodes and Marshall actually funding? And what programs can I propose? What does that look like? Then we're going to move into kind of some of the how-to, right? Like, well, how should I think about program selection? And how do I research those things? What are some best practices for that? But before we even get into that kind of like bigger vision piece, thinking about how all the components fit together, there are some basic fundamentals that you need to be familiar with that have to do with what is allowable in terms of program proposal for your nomination application and then for the external application. So for the Marshall Scholarship, the Marshall funds graduate study in the UK, nearly any accredited institution of higher learning that offers graduate programs in the UK. This means that almost anywhere that is an accredited degree granting university, you can propose the Marshall as the funding backing, right, for that program. So I think there is often a defaulting into kind of Googling first the universities you've likely heard of in the UK, right? Oxford, Cambridge, LSE, some of the London schools, King's, UCL, like those are brand names, right? Now they're brand names for a reason because they are, very elite in the UK, prestigious universities. And certainly many of you are going to be looking at those institutions as a place where you can get a really solid and good graduate education. However, I do want to emphasize for the Marshall that there can be two things can happen that I might urge you to consider when selecting degree programs for the purpose of your Marshall application that can potentially impact the competitiveness of your application, okay? Number one, the Marshall is a scholarship that seeks to fulfill a mission that supports, the goal of furthering cross-cultural ties between the United Kingdom and the United States. And they seek to do that by sending a diverse and interesting representative of US recipients to the UK to have a diverse range of UK experiences. That means that the Marshall Scholarship is not interested in sending 40 or 50 of their recipients each year exclusively to the Golden Triangle. Golden Triangle being Cambridge, Oxford, and LSE. So if you think about all of the national applicant pool, you think about the representation of those top 3 schools and many of the London schools, King's, Imperial, UCL, a few others, right? Like those are going to comprise a huge proportion of the national applicant pool. While the Foreign Office in the UK, the entity that actually runs this program, is interested in sending US Marshals to a diverse range of schools. So for that reason, depending upon what you want to do and where you want to go, I would encourage you to think broadly about program selection, because if you have found a good program at a great school that's outside of London, that's not Cambridge or Oxford, you are going to stand out by virtue of everybody else is picking Oxford, Cambridge, LSE, right? So think about having a broad way, thinking about your application in a broad way. And I'm not asking you to just pick a random school that nobody may not have, like that few people have heard of for the sake of just difference, right? There's a calculus that you're going to have to do between the strength of your application and what you want to do, where that meets having an interesting program proposal that might be lesser, represented in the application pool, right? So those are just things to think about, number one. Number two, sometimes, so I'm the 2 points about program selection for the Marshall that I'm asking you to think about doing a bit of homework that identifies programs that stand outside of those that you might immediately think of, okay? The second reason why is because not always is the best education that you can get for the subject matter or discipline that you're seeking graduate study for going to have the best experts at Oxford. And if you end up proposing a program at Oxford or Cambridge or one of the more, kind of like elite institutions in the UK, while in fact, the leading expert or the department that's top ranked for that discipline or subject matter is at a different university, you can be downgraded because you really haven't, in terms of your competitiveness. They can think like, well, why didn't you actually pick, if you know so much about this is what you really want to do, you're proposing the best education you can have at Oxford, and yet the expert is at the University of Sheffield, that like, how did you not think of that program, right? That's going to kind of raise inconsistencies in the thoughtfulness of your application. So that's why doing some research and not just defaulting into finding the best program at one of the 3 schools that you can name off the top of your head, right, is worth really being serious about. And this is, I hope if you walk away from the workshop today, you're going to walk away with like, okay, I have work to do on researching the degree program. Again, I said this in the issue workshop, that issue area workshop, that if you end up proposing a program that's like at worst ineligible, you can see the restrictions here on the Marshall on the screen, right? Like on the slide here, like it's not funding an MBA. You're not doing a MPhil in development studies at Oxford. There's a whole bunch of Oxford programs that are not allowable for a number of reasons that I won't get into here. But like, I want you to, again, think about sorry, doing some of the fundamentals. I lost my train of thought because I was just distracted by a new MSc that's not tenable for your applications. So anyway, okay. So my point is, if you pick a program that at the time of internal nomination is ineligible or not a good fit, if all of the other materials are there and you have a strong candidacy that can be developed because you're applying for a development process, we're not going to like immediately strike you from the nomination consideration, review. But you should think about, it probably doesn't set you up in the best light to propose something that's ineligible. So become familiar with the ineligibility. When it comes to fit, sometimes that develops over the course of the summer. So put your best, degree program proposal together for the nomination application as it sits with your current thinking, and you've done some good research between now and May 1st. And as you work with us, as your vision is refined, you can change your programs before the external submission of your application later in the fall. One of the reasons why we ask you for the proposed programs or course of study up front is because ultimately you're asking for a graduate degree program. We want to see how you're thinking, and you will, while not for internal nomination purposes, but later for nominees, you will write an essay about your proposed program. And that essay has to like sing. It has to be like, this is absolutely the education that this person needs and we must fund, right? I think the proposed program essay is one of those things that is lesser thought about and is a place where you can really argue for your candidacy. And if you can do that better than other people, despite other people having potentially better qualifications for this and that and the other, I think it's hard to deny if you make going to this exact program an essential component of your application, then it just strengthens your application, like when we send you off for the final review in the fall. Okay. Anyway, so you will find all of these guidelines that I posted on this slide on Marshall's website. So go check those out. But essentially the Marshall is funding you for 2 years. One of the things I want to highlight here is the Marshall, because they're funding you for 2 years, you have 2 options. You can propose a 2-year degree program, typically called the MPhil. MPhils are programs that are a bit more focused on research. So you're often doing like a pretty substantive graduate thesis in your second year, exclusively doing research and doing that thesis in the second year. So MPhils are sort of like the more researchy master's programs. The MSCs, Master of Science, that's your kind of like your typical master's program like you would find here in the US. Those are typically 1 year. That's different because in the US, most master's programs are 2 years. So because the typical master's taught courses, so not the big research courses that might be 2 years worth of study, because most of your masters are only 1 year's worth of study and the Marshall is offering you 2 years of funding, you can do two different master's degrees at different institutions in different subject matters. They have to make sense in terms of how your vision is being designed and developed. But I would encourage you, if you don't necessarily have a justification for a 2-year degree program and wanting to do the research and this is the best piece of research and you really want to do the MPhil, I encourage you to do the 2 years, 2 1-year options where you're proposing to do 2 different subject matters for 1 year each at different institutions. Why? Because again, you're getting a diverse UK experience, and that's something that the scholarship seeks to support, really, okay? Last thing about this. You will notice, and you're thinking to yourself, where do I do all this program proposal? Okay. How is this impacting the nomination application? You'll be talking about your degree program selection in your video pitch. And again, we'll tell you like how you're going to do that at the video pitch workshop. You will also be entering in those degree program proposed program selections in the application cover sheet. That's a component of a fully submitted application for nomination. All of those components are found in the newsletter where we kind of spell it out, what's required, when, and how to submit that information. But there will be a table that you'll have to fill out that says, what am I going to do with my 2 years in the Marshall? What am I proposing to do? You will also take note, have to put in backup programs, right? Just like you might apply here in the States to a number of graduate programs, or like as you likely did for your undergraduate degree, you're not just applying to one, you're applying to probably many. In that same spirit, in addition to saying, here's my 2 years of study, I have 1 year at Bath, 1 year at Manchester doing these 2 programs. You're then going to have to find and offer your backup program. Okay, so if those 2 don't work out, here are the other 2 programs I'm thinking. All right, so keep that in mind. You could very well be proposing 4 programs in your nomination application, and indeed in the final application if you have 2 1-year degrees at different institutions that are then backed up by 2, you call them safety or backups. It's not uncommon for those, like the backup plan, to be at lesser ranked institutions or institutions that have a higher admit rate. Again, if you think about, a safety school mentality, your backup programs are kind of covering kind of that element of your application. Okay. This is the technical bits. If this is really confusing, please go ahead and drop a question in the chat box, all right? For the Rhodes is funded by a private trust, all right? If you're not familiar with the history of Cecil Rhodes, I encourage you to start now becoming familiar with the fraught ongoing challenge of this scholarship in the face of a benefactor that was extraordinarily racist and colonial, and has had a challenge in how to reconcile that, particularly in the last 5, 6, 7 years, as many institutions have done internal reconciliation with their fraught legacies. If you think about Georgetown's reparations work, if you think about the national monuments movement, there's a lot of ways that the Rhodes has similarly needed to internally look at their participation in systemic racism and inequity, so on and so forth, and have not always taken certain steps towards making good on that in a way that we might typically expect, given the progress that institutions have attempted to make there, okay? So I always kind of like just say, earmark that. If you end up getting nomination for the Rhodes, it's something that as a cohort we work through. there's no easy answers. I don't have those easy answers for you. There are some people that prefer not to apply for the roads and wouldn't want to because of that. We have a lot of people that have to reconcile how you align yourself with various institutions that have complicated and complex histories. This is just one of them, and I'm saying I want you to start looking at that now. Again, as we move forward with our nominees, this becomes a point of conversation where it's just important to understand the complexities of the communities you aspire to join. Okay, all right, with that said, sorry about that little digression. Basically, the roads is going to fund you for 2 years. There is a 3rd-year possibility for DPhil applicants, although at the time of application for nomination, I would say unless you absolutely know you want a doctorate, Oxford has weird ways, it's like a PhD, right? Then, and that's like, you will not, like doctorate is in your plans, it's in your next steps. If you weren't doing it at Oxford, then you'd be doing it somewhere else because you want to do the PhD, you want to do the DPhil. At the time of internal nomination, I encourage you to think about proposing the MPhil and then maybe suggesting that you're interested in the DPhil in that subject matter after the MPhil, so like master's into DPhil. And we, if you receive nomination, can talk about, you know, how to pitch that, because there is slight, I think, biased towards funding the 2-year programs, right? The Rhodes does have a certain set of funds that can only fund a certain subset of scholarships each year. And if everybody's doing a DPhil, that kind of bloats the, you know, ability for them to make places. So there could be a way that, yeah, DPhil, and we have had people do DPhils. Our most recent Canadian Rhodes Scholar, Sarah Rottenberg, did a DPhil. It's possible, but I do think at this point, look for the MPhil, and then you absolutely can change if you want to later at external nomination. At the external application process later on in the fall. Okay. Again, you can go look at Rhodes Scholarship to find all of these degree requirements. I can also send you the links, etc. We'll put those out in the newsletter as well. I want to highlight one thing that I think is pretty cool. Okay. You can propose for your Rhodes application a second bachelor's degree. Why would you want to do that? Right? You already did one bachelor's degree. Why don't you go do another one? And this does not make you any less competitive for the Rhodes Scholarship if you want to do a second bachelor's degree, as opposed to doing like 2 masters again, right? You can do a second bachelor's in a number of subjects, and I think the benefit is that you get to take part in the tutorial system, right? There is a way that if you're making a bit of a pivot from one subject to another, that might be challenging for you to receive entry into a master's program because you don't have certain prerequisites. You might want to do a second bachelor's degree. There are a number of second bachelor's degree Rhodes recipients who have done the famous and like world, you know, renowned, whatever, recognized the PPE, the politics, philosophy, and econ, right? And you're getting that kind of intense experience through the tutorial system, which you're not going to get as a graduate student. And I don't know how, it's like it's Hogwarts or something. After 7 years, your second bachelor's confers and turns itself into a master's degree. I've been advising on the Rhodes Scholarship for over a decade. I still am unclear on how that magic happens, but it does. Okay. So if it's like puts you off to think, oh, you know, I don't want to have 2 bachelors on my record. It's almost like 7 years is when they discharge your debt, right? Like if you've gone to collections, I don't know, like apparently in 7 years, if you do your second bachelor's degree, then it magically turns into a master's. All right. Anyway. So those are just some things to think about. And of course, there's similar restrictions in terms of those professional degrees. Oftentimes, if you think about the Rhodes and Marshall being that mission-centered, you know, focused, you know, kind of groups, organizations, they're not as interested in sending you to do financial economics and MBA, some of those things that might have a more traditional professional private sector output. All right. I mean, now we're talking about if you kind of get loosely what the Rhodes and Marshall are funding. You know, they have some funding restrictions, you know, both of them pretty much funding 2 years. You know that, again, Rhodes is only funding programs at Oxford. It makes it a little bit easier for you to do the research for your Rhodes application because of the more limited availability. Like if you got to find something that's a graduate program at Oxford, okay? So that makes it a little bit easier. The Marshall has a much wider scope. You may be doing more research. So you're like, where do I even start with some of this, okay? Well, first, it's helpful if you loosely understand the issue that you want to make a difference, where you want to make a difference. So if you think about maybe reverse engineering the trajectory piece, that can be helpful. Like, are there ways that you kind of want to be this sort of candidate, the candidate that makes an impact in XYZ discipline, area, space, profession, right? Then what might I need to do in order to get from where I'm at now to what I want to be able to do in the future in terms of making some sort of impact or change, all right? Then the graduate degree program subjects, or the graduate programs you might want to enroll in based on the subjects that you need more expertise in, might be a good place to start. Some students or some applicants go from like, well, if I was doing, you know, like English in my undergrad, I should just go and continue to do English at the graduate level. So you can do that if you'd like, but I think it's a little bit more useful to think about the vision, because not always will the subjects you're currently studying line up with the graduate education that would be most useful for the change you want to see or the career you want to have. So let's say you're an English major now and you're thinking about journalism and you're like, I should just continue potentially to do English as a master at the master's level, and I can still think about the ways that, you know, writing, persuasion, story, etc. work. You can continue to do that through English degree programs, certainly, but there's also interesting programs that you could propose that are slightly adjacent to that, whether it's communication studies, whether it's rhetoric, whether it's looking at digital like communications. There's a ton of journalism, just straight programs, right? Or there's maybe a subject within that. Maybe you want to be a journalist that does something very particular related to a certain issue. And so maybe you started with an English background. You want to work on, you know, narratives of disinformation, right? You want to be able to kind of think about how information influences like what we know to be true. You might look at a program that has a completely different foundation. Maybe you're interested in doing that in relation to pandemic discourse. Maybe you take a public health because you're interested. Maybe you take a public health master's, you see, where I aspire to be a journalist that reports on issues. I'm doing this off the cuff, so I hope this makes sense. I aspire to be a journalist that makes a difference in how we report emergency-based information that is of like, you know, public concern, like the pandemic, etc., right? But I need to have a toolbox that has the language, standards, and practices of public health. And I haven't done a lot of public health stuff. So I might be an English major with a vision to make a difference in journalism. You may be proposing a public health degree, okay? You see how that works? You see how those pieces fit together? So you've got to think about what is the package, the pit that you're bringing together, and how do those degree programs become really interesting skill sets that help get you to a place where you're making a difference in your career, a career trajectory that you're going to have to be able to propose and to talk about in an interview throughout the course of applying and going through the, you know, application interview process for these competitive fellowships. All right. So what subject matters do you need more expertise in? One of the cool things about doing the UK fellowships in the postgrad space, maybe before you get into your career, is that you can develop expertise in potentially adjacent fields that might be of use to you in your long-term career trajectory. And think about Naomi, our most recent Marshall recipient, who is a scientist through and through, who will be doing work on synthetic biology that allows for her to make interesting scientific advancements in applied areas like gene drive research, etc. One of her degree programs is scientific communication, because she understands the necessity of future scientists to be able to cross the translation from the bench, to basically to the bedside, whatever, to the public world, to public facing audiences. She wants to think about a career that takes what she can do and maximizes it through doing a degree that doesn't even sit in science. So she's doing 1 year where she's doing hard science research at Imperial. She's proposed another year where she's doing the science communication work, right? So that she can, so she presented a trajectory that allowed her to communicate this really interesting thing about how she saw what she wanted to do. And I would encourage you all to kind of think like that. Now, how would going to the UK really be something that gives me something I could not get without the UK fellowship? Almost like a career accelerating, post-bac, okay? Last thing about this, it's not uncommon for students to propose degree programs, to apply for the Rhodes and Marshall, and then end up coming back to the US for another degree. It's not, I would say a good number of students come back and end up doing, finding that law school is important, but very purposefully they've understood how law school is important now, right? Or they end up doing a PhD. Like Naomi will come back to the United States after the Marshall to do her PhD because the best PhDs in her subject are basically in the United States. And I think maybe one other country, I'm not quite sure. But anyway, so this doesn't have to be the be all end all for your graduate study. And in some cases it is. You go, maybe you do the DPhil, maybe you master's out and you go right into your career. That's not uncommon either. So just keep that. I don't want you to think that the UK fellowships is limiting in that way. I'll show you a few research tools here that you'll want to play around with later on. And the third step is to, after you've looked at a number of program subject matters, you've looked up at how you've looked up with various research tools, how these are offered at different institutions in the UK and at Oxford, then you want to think about how do those pieces fit within the argument you're making, right? Like how are you going to argue or connect the dots or suggest that this degree program is the best thing for you? Okay, those are sort of the 3 basic steps. When you're looking at subject matters, of course, you want to make sure you're looking at the fundamentals of the degree program. Like maybe you've done a little bit of research, you found a few degree programs, you're on their website, you're checking it out. Some basics on, entry requirements. Is it an eligible program? Do you have the prereqs that are needed, etc.? All of those are like step 1. Step 2 is then how am I going to argue that this is a better educational experience than I'm going to get at another institution in the UK? And that's where it's really helpful for those of you that have done research or are familiar with how research gets done, knowledge gets built. You understand how people make knowledge, right? So when you're picking a program, the individuals that you are going to take classes from, be mentored by, write theses under their supervision, they become like the good or the resource that you're seeking affiliation with. It's not necessarily the degree program at the end of the day that like stamps your success as a graduate student. It's how were you disciplined? How were you trained? And under like what individuals did you receive that education from? So knowing about the people affiliated with the degree program becomes really important. So are there scholars with research interests or expertise that align with your interests, subject matters? And that's the level of specificity that ultimately, when you write your final applications, you're going to have to be able to articulate. You're going to have to say, well, the history ideas is often credited by a man named Quentin Skinner, and he spent most of his time at Cambridge and then recently moved to Queen's. And that's why I'm proposing to do, because I want to study the history of ideas. That's why I'm proposing 1 year at Cambridge and then 1 year at Queen's, because I'm going to follow the founder of a paradigm within history that I want to study. So it's not about like, oh, Cambridge is a cool place to go and they have the degree program I like. It's not the brochure level. It's the how you're going to have the most excellent educational experience based on the individuals and the way that they teach the work that you want to study at the departmental level. That's typically the way I would encourage you to think about graduate study. That's also something I have to train you guys on usually when we move into the space with the nominees. I think very few undergraduate or early career alumni who apply for the Rhodes and Marshall quite get how knowledge is actually built at academic institutions, even though you were a part of it for a very long time and got a degree that certified you knew something, right? Like, and going through this process, I'll also help you understand how some of those disciplinary knowledge making, like systems work. Because I don't think always we do a good job, and I mean Georgetown or the typical undergraduate degree, in explaining some of those features. Those of you that have done theses or are in the hard sciences have a little bit more of a better understanding about this. But anyway, it's one thing to be able to say, hey, I Googled this degree program, it looks great. It's another thing to be like, I have to go here because of this foremost scholar who like changed the field. And now all of those who have come after them at this department study this issue in this way. And I need to study this issue in this way because this is the impact that I want to have. Again, that's a big bar for nomination, but that's what you're striving towards. That's what we're going to help you do when you move into the candidacy development program in any case. And that's why often your degree programs end up changing as you go through. Another way to look at arguing the appropriateness of a program that you've proposed is to look at other resources at the institution. What other centers, institutes, what other things are going on that would enhance your educational experience and make it all the more worthwhile. And finally, not for the Rhodes doesn't care, but for the Marshall, there's a way that like your geographic location within the like UK microcosms, right? Like can give you a certain cultural experience that adds to the educational experience that also kind of sometimes informs institutional selection. Okay, here's some research tools for you guys. First of all, the Marshall does a cool database where you can do a course search. Okay. I'm going to take you really quick to show you a few, just briefly. Let me stop the screen share, stop share, and then look at, I'm going to show you guys one thing. I'll send you these links too, if you'd like. If you have any questions, anything you see, you're like, I don't know how to get to it myself, and it was on the UK workshop, can you help? Just email, we can help direct you to it. So let's do a screen share. Whoops, hold on. All right. Let's look at this. Okay. Look, more British institutions. Okay, British universities, right? Look at all these. These are some of the top ones. They're not exclusively. They might be pretty comprehensive. I don't know how they have this like more tab. I think that's funny. All right, so this is a good place to start. At least these are places where the Marshall are like have had recipients, or they're asking you to maybe look at these as possible courses of study or places of study. Here's a database that the Marshall has on their website that allows you to do a bit of searching. Let's see. Okay, right? You see this little check mark, it's like Marshall partner. Those are schools that give the Marshall like a fee cut. So any Marshall partner schools are schools where they have arrangements that allow for Marshall students to be there and it doesn't cost the Foreign Office as much. Now, if all things are equal, pick a Marshall school. If you're, I wouldn't just pick a non-Marshall partner school in order to, sorry, I wouldn't just pick a Marshall partner school if a non-partner school is the absolute best education that you could have, because you need to argue like the fundamental necessity of the program. And if it's not a partner school, it's not going to make that much of a difference. But if all things are equal, go ahead and pick the Marshall school as a option. Again, here's where you can just start searching by subject matter. And honestly, like, the UK could name things a little bit differently. So get creative with your search terms. Make sure that like, you've used, if you kind of have a subject matter that you want to study, think thoughtfully about your synonyms. What is it called in the UK? That kind of stuff. All right. This is just like, okay, these are some of the rules again with Rhodes. I was just trying to see in the, okay. Now, I want to show you a couple things here. Let's do stop share, and then we'll reshare here. This is okay. So if we've done the thing about, here's some of the program basics, here's what's required. I kind of loosely get the idea that I have to kind of incorporate this in piece, that I have to really well argue the necessity of the degree program, at least at the point of your nomination application, you're going to have to make essential and relevant the degree program. And again, the more that you go through the development process, the more familiar with the program and the way to argue for that program, or even to change it if you need to find a better option. We do all that. We can do all that with you, but that's kind of the way you need to be thinking, right? Now, you'll see on the slide here, there are ways to look at top programs that you may not be familiar with in your, because remember I said, like, hey, if you're, proposing to do, historiography at Oxford, and you really want to do, and you're not familiar with like how exactly the way that you want to do that historical methods research is really founded at Cambridge, then you're just going to look a little silly, right? So that means you need to look at how expertise, where to find the experts, right, in your subject matter. That's by a few things. These 1, 2, 3 on the research side. The Russell Group is a group of 24 UK universities that are certified as, the top producing research institutions. And usually research institutions are those that are the most usually expert in their domains of study. So for example, you might have heard that Georgetown University is, we call it the Carnegie classification system here in the United States. So you have R1, R2, R3, and R1 are the top universities for research universities. Georgetown's an R1 university, right? The Russell Group is a similar classification system. Your R1s in the US are going to have all the Ivies in them, or most of them. I don't know if Dartmouth, like there's a few schools that in the US that might be like liberal arts focused teaching colleges and still have like, you get a leading educational experience at the undergraduate level, but those institutions that produce PhDs, that get big, research grants, all that kind of stuff, those are going to fall into a classification system for research productivity. And in the UK, that's called the Russell Group. So those top institutions, and there still may be a good program that sits outside of the top 24 research institutions, just depends on what you want to do, how applied what you want to do is, how hard, kind of the research fundamentals are for your discipline or field that you seek to develop expertise in, et cetera. That's just something to become familiar with. There's a research excellence framework. This is a framework for evaluating, the research product, the quality of research at degree granting institutions in the UK. They have a website. It'll talk, you can like there's some search engine functionality where you can look at what within research assessment is important. You click some boxes, you put your subject matter in, and then it'll on the other side, like spit out the best, based on their indicators, their assessment indicators, the best programs for those sorts of criteria that you define within kind of the research framework is the most important. So I'd suggest that you, even if you have your degree programs, maybe you've already found them, I would still suggest you look up where they land in the Russell Group, what some of those benchmarks are for their productivity, their quality by the REF framework. And then also similarly, the UK Council for International Students offers you some basics on how to think about program selection and expertise for international students. So while 1 and 2 are for like, that's going to be primarily information that's really salient for colleges and universities in the UK, right? Like that's really important to them. That third recommendation, the UK Council, is sort of geared for the international applicant. So they might have on their website helpful information that translates some of those things that are derived from the Russell Group and the Research Excellence Framework, indicators for external facing audiences. After that, and again, I think you need to look by subject you know, not by like just an institution. So you might be like, okay, I know that this institution ranks, you know, whatever place. That must mean, you know, that's got to be the top institution. I look for my program for like through which I look for a program that's suitable. When in fact, sometimes you'll find like the best programs, the best disciplines, right? Or the scholars that are the most well regarded and doing the most cutting edge research in a particular field is not at the institution that's the most highly ranked, particularly when you think about, you know, undergraduate rankings, right? Like here in the United States, it, you know, like at the undergraduate level, you kind of just get, you know, News and World Reports kind of spits out a ranking that's based on just the general undergraduate student experience. At the graduate level, you need to be looking at the subject matter or disciplinary rankings to find out where you're going to have the best educational experience. And they don't always line up. Like, you know, just because Georgetown is, what are we like number, oh guys, what are we now? You guys probably know better. We're like 17 or something for undergrad. Someone put that in the chat. What are we? What's the most recent ranking of Georgetown undergrad? Someone can Google quickly for me. 22. Oh, I was being generous with the 17, yo. It was like 17% accept rate or something. I was getting mad. 22. Okay, where does Georgetown law fall in, right? Like it's pretty high. It's in T14, right? It may even be in the top half of the T14. Is that correct? I know you guys are also thinking about law school. I'm trying to get you to like hold off just a minute before you default into that. But I'm just saying there's like differences at the graduate level where your undergrad or your institutional ranking may not be the clearest signal for, you know, expertise at the disciplinary graduate study level. And for that reason, I caution you a little bit when you look up rankings to make sure you're like, you know, what the rankings are evaluating, right? And for the UK, those that are most widely read, like the US News and World Report ranking, the Guardian's University Guide, and the Times Higher Education Supplement, often give you a pretty good estimation of rankings, but just always be careful that is this overall, is this the undergraduate level, is this disciplinary based? Those are all important caveats, okay? All of these have web pages. You're good Googlers. I know you can find them, but I will just quickly, really quickly. Let's say stop share. I'll show you what those landing pages look like because I think this is really essential for your research. Let's do this one here, okay? Here's the REF landing page, right? You've got really cool reports. You've got some like cool infographics here, okay? You can look at all sorts of stuff. Well, that's gonna be a little, my internet, okay. It tells you how they did it, how they assessed things. Not a bad idea just to spend a little bit of time, particularly if you've already made your decision on graduate programs, just or narrowed it pretty well. Important things around, you know, proposing programs where you're also going to feel welcome as a part of the community, right? Like looking at some of these indicators for overall like quality of educational experience too is really important. All right, Russell Group, you can kind of basically, this is really straightforward. Like there's basically 25 of these guys. This just tells you how they, you know, make those determinations. Let's see. Just like, okay, 24, blah, blah, blah. Well, you can find it's not that hard. You could even, there's a wiki page too. If you just Google Russell Group schools, you'll find the wiki page as well. There's the Council for International Student Affairs. Again, this was sort of like a third level. It might be helpful to look at some basic stuff. This would be helpful too if you're like, what's an MRes? MPhil, MSc, MAT, MLit. Oh my goodness, I don't know what all these things are. Some of that kind of stuff would be helpful here, and you'll find out more information that helps decode some of those things. Here's the Times 2024 rankings. Look, you can do it by subject, right? That's nice. And then you're going to find some of these stats around student size, staff size, international students, all sorts of interesting things, okay? Really take a look at that. And then you have the Times. So like your Guardian's the left-leaning publication in the UK. The Times is your more conservative leaning paper, although they're both pretty centrist. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. Someone can refute me on that, but that's sort of how shorthand for those two publications. All right. Oh, this is fun. This one I meant by the nomination application components. You need to really be clear on what's required here. You see this nomination application cover sheet? Okay, this is where you're gonna put your degree program. I hope you don't mind me bouncing a little bit. All right, look. You're gonna have to put in here, year 1, year 2, degree program, okay? University, degree, graduate program. Year 1 backup, year 2 backup. That's what I was referring to earlier. All right, let me go back to the slides, we're almost done. You're hanging with me, guys. I think I've had pretty much consistently, almost everyone who's jumped on has stayed on. I appreciate you for that. I know sometimes your calendars don't permit, but let's see. I also appreciate bearing with me with a lot of this sort of technical information. All right. There's the links, okay? Can send you the PowerPoint if you need it. I think I said I was gonna link the PowerPoint from the last 2 workshops in the newsletter, but they didn't get in there. We will try this coming next Mondays to link all the PowerPoints. I mean, you can also watch the videos, they're linked there, but here's all those links. Essentially, again, if you Google that, I'm gonna take a screenshot. I'm gonna give everybody like 3 seconds to take a screenshot, then you'll have it ready. 1, 2, 3. All right, cool. And then when it comes to like that, you're gonna be swimming in information. I want you to realize 2 things. You'll learn more if you just keep asking questions. So go talk to professors. Sometimes your professors have been to the UK to study, and they are also people that could connect you with professors there to have, you know, clarifying moments of interchange, exchange, conversation. Talk to your advising deans. Talk to who? Maybe the Center for Research and Fellowships would have experts in this that you might want to consult. We'd be happy to talk with you about your, you know, program questions or ideas. Bounce that off of us, okay? And then also, I'm just going to let you know that you're probably not going to be like totally confident in your proposal at the time of, you know, submitting your nomination application. That's okay. Just again, we're going to teach you how to get to the place of optimization, but there's going to be pieces in anybody's application that's just not fully baked yet. If it was fully baked, we wouldn't run a development process. We would just be like, here's how you do a competitive application, go do it, right? But no, we help you develop. So this is important to bear in mind and to give it your best shot, to think this way, to do this research, but time is always a limitation. You're not going to have time to do all the research you want. You're not going to have time to like fully feel like you have found your forever issue, like your forever person or partner, right? Like, no, my forever issue. I feel confident. It's okay. Just do your best at nomination and know that if you've thought in this way about it, and you've done a little bit of deliberation, you've already done all of the work that got you to this point where you are applying, that's going to show through. Don't count yourself out because you're worried about, you know, having the most highly developed application by May 1, okay? Just do your best, shoot your shot, okay? Make sure all that stuff gets submitted by noon on May 1st. We have about 2, 3, 4 weeks of review. We'll get back to you, and then nominees enroll in the development program. If you're offered a nomination spot, you'll get a lot more information about what that looks like and what the commitment and the time looks like, what some of the flexibilities are, what some of the flexibilities are not. And we give you an offer. We give you an offer by region or district. So while this isn't necessarily pertinent for today's UK study workshop, I will let you know when I previewed that cover sheet earlier, you saw where you put your program selection. You're also there putting in all possible districts, regions, or constituencies you could apply in. We do not send all of our most competitive applicants for this to DC. So just because everybody that applies through us can apply in DC does not mean you'll be offered a nomination spot for DC. Okay, so you don't get to pick what constituency you apply in. You get an offer of nomination for a region or a district. That's based on our evaluation of how we want to place candidates, and we don't want to place them all in the most competitive, all in the same place because you get trained the same way. We want to spread out Georgetown nominees. That doesn't mean that we haven't had, I guess 3 years ago, we had 3 DC Marshall recipients, all in DC, right? So it's not impossible to get final interviews and have multiple people from one university win, but it's not as likely as if we try to spread you guys out. Okay, so that's a little bit of like how all that kind of like placement stuff works on the backside. I will not answer questions about that right now, but I will invite you to ask those for sure. Very transparent about how that works. If you have questions, come to an advising session. You can, if it's a quick question, you can email us. Happy to share some of that information with you. If you have questions about, I'm not sure about where my districts would be because my parents have 6 houses or they don't live in the US anymore or whatever, like we're happy to field some of those questions so that you put the right data in the cover sheet that's a part of that application. But in any case, see you next week or 2 weeks from now, I think maybe. What are we on? Yeah, I think that's about 2 weeks from now, where we're going to be talking to you about how to put that pitch together. And at that point, you have all the information that you need to put your best foot forward. Let me jump into the chat real quick because I saw, let me stop the recording first, jump into the chat. I'll take, if you need to go, pop off, you do you. Thank you for coming. And then, okay, stop share. Let me stop the video, stop recording. Okay. And then,